Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Faerie Conclave. My name is Jarom. My pronouns are he, him, and today I have the wonderful opportunity to interview Alec and talk about one of his commander decks. So, Alec, this will be a great episode. I'm excited to be back for this.
Hello, hi. My name is Alec. My pronouns are he, him, and normally I'm on the other end of the intro recording me saying hello and welcome. But I am excited to hear your voice, Jarom. How are you doing?
It is so good to be back. I sincerely miss recording podcasts, but I am also very happy to be in full on dad mode at the moment. But I was able to steal some time tonight to get online and talk about some magic. So it's going to be a stellar episode. I'm excited to dive into the deck you've prepared for us.
Yeah, me too. Also, for those who maybe started listening to the Faerie Conclave recently who might not know, Jarom is my old co-host who the two of us started the Faerie Conclave together. Yeah, and then Jarom had a baby like not too long ago. And
7 months. 7 months.
seven
Yep.
months. Wow. Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, and so you kind of switched over. You switched your side job from recording podcasts to taking care of a human being. And how has that been going?
It has been going great. She's a little bundle of joy. It's been a ton of fun. I still try and find time for magic. She is my new source of magic in my life. I
Aw.
love to also include some paper magic, in games when I can squeeze it in. But I will always be a huge fan of the Fairy Conclave. It's just so near and dear to my heart. I'll never forget it was around Christmas, I think 2018, when HB was like, you guys should do a podcast, and we looked at each other like, yeah, whatever. Like, what are you talking about? Here we are, like in 2022. Holy cow!
Yeah,
And I was
I can't believe it. And I'm glad that we're still here. You and I and doing an episode. Yeah, it's really cool.
just like old times, just like old times.
Exactly. I love it. Yeah, and so I had this idea. One of my specialties on the Fairy Conclave is to bring out people who have like cool viewpoints in the magic community who I want to talk to. My excuse to talk to them is to do a commander deck interview where I interview them about one of their favorite commander decks. And really, it's just an excuse for me to hang out with cool people who play magic. But yeah, so we do a lot of episodes where I talk about someone's commander deck and we go through a bunch of questions about the deck and just kind of talk about it. And I realized probably since the last time I talked about one of my own decks on the podcast, I've built a whole bunch of decks and probably made like 40 episodes or something of this podcast. So yeah, I reached out to Jeremy. I was like, would you want to do an episode where you are the interviewer and I can talk about one of my decks? And I was very excited for you to agree to do that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited. I mean, you put so much time and effort into this wonderful podcast. I think it's time for us to really to see your side, your perspective.
Whoa.
You've become very close with it. I think
Yeah.
it's only fair that we dive into one of yours. So I'm really stoked.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm super stoked as well. And before we get into it, Jaron, would you like to do our community spotlight for the episode today?
Yeah, absolutely. So the community spotlight I'd like to mention today is the Epic Storm on YouTube. So Brian on the Epic Storm does a ton of MTGO content. It's a really chill environment. I've found myself really enjoying a lot of popper content and modern content. I am at heart a true Commander player. I don't think that will ever change, but I think sometimes when I just need a change of pace, I really enjoy going on there and watching some of the cool decks. Definitely one of the specialties that he likes to showcase on that channel is storm-based decks. I guess that's definitely where the name comes from, the Epic
Mm-hmm.
Storm, and it's really fun to see how powerful Pauper deck can be, and a bunch of really fun storm-based modern decks. So it's a really fun environment, and he does a really good job of explaining the cards and what he's doing and why he built it, and he does a little deck introduction before each one. So if you haven't watched any content of the Epic Storm, I definitely suggest going to check it out because it's a really good channel to follow on YouTube, and I've enjoyed their content through and through. So yeah, check them out.
Awesome. Yeah, I will have links to the Epic Storms content on YouTube in the episode description. So definitely check it out. And this one was new to me. So thank you for introducing me, Jarom. I'm excited
Yeah.
to. I already subscribed on YouTube, and I'm excited to go watch some videos. So yeah, thank you so much.
Awesome. Okay. Well, let's dive into it now. The time has come, Alec. Are you ready?
I think so. It's very funny. I am used to trying to figure out the transitions and segues and how to get into the questions, but now I kind of just hang back and just talk. So
Yeah, you just sit back in your chair. You have your whole deck out strewn on the kitchen table in front of you, and let's just dive into it. So, question number one: why don't you introduce who your commander is and the inspiration to build this deck?
Yeah, for sure. So the commander that we're going to be talking about today is Satoru Umezawa, which is a relatively recent new legendary creature. It's from the Kamigawa Neon Dynasty set. It feels like along a lot of sets ago, which it kind of was, but it did come out in 2022, so not too long ago, earlier this year. And I've just been playing this deck a ton. I've been enjoying it so much. And I'm excited to talk about it because I think, and this is something I have a lot of decks, and my favorite deck changes quite often, or at least it did. But ever since I built this deck, it's just kind of been my favorite. And every time I play it, I have a blast. So I'm excited to talk about it. Yeah. And the inspiration, I honestly, when Satoru was like previewed, I thought it was a cool card, but I wasn't immediately drawn to it. I wasn't like, I need to build a deck around this ASAP, which is, I feel like that's usually what happens. I'll see a preview for a new card and I'll just immediately need to build something. But it wasn't until like after the set released and maybe a few weeks later that I realized Satoru would be an awesome commander for a demons deck, which is something that I have kind of been trying to make work for at least 5 or 6 years now. I've always wanted to play like a full-on demons deck in commander, but the problem is demons they tend to be either 6 or more mana, and there isn't really a commander that like ties them together too much. There are a couple like Rakdos commanders that have like a light demon kind of synergy, but there wasn't one that really caught my eye that I wanted to play just like a ton of demons in until I saw this deck or this commander and realized that Satoru effectively reduces the cost of big creatures. A lot of people are using it for like Eldrazi and stuff, but I thought, let's try it with demons, and I'll just throw a bunch of demons in there and see what happens. And I've just been like hooked ever since then.
That's glorious. And looking at the art of Satoru Umezawa, it looks like there's like a bunch of like spirits like kind of looming around. It almost looks like, I mean, they're probably spirits, knowing coming out, but it's like those are his inner demons tormenting him, and you're just like letting them loose. I don't know what the flavor is exactly there, but I think that's being able to combine this deck with like a theme of demons is just, I think it's so unique and really adds for like, it's just it seems like such a fun play style that never gets old. I think this is pretty sweet. So why don't you read Satoru Umezawa's ability for those who may not be familiar with it?
Oh, yes, of course. I got so excited, I forgot to do that. So yeah, Satoru Umezawa is 1, a blue, and a black for 2/4 legendary human ninja. And it says, whenever you activate a ninjutsu ability, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. This ability triggers only once each turn, which, it's like some card selection, but the spicy part is the second ability, which is each creature card in your hand has ninjutsu for 2, a blue, and a black. So, I think when this came out, people thought it would be a ninjas commander for like ninja decks. And I know a lot of people build that, which is fine. I think that's fun too, but Satoru doesn't really need other ninjas because it gives everything ninjutsu on its own. And of course I have a couple other ninjas that I think fit well in the deck, but yeah, I think the main thing is that the ninjutsu ability allows you to kind of cheat on mana costs quite a bit. So basically any creature you can play for 4 mana And I should explain ninjutsu a little bit because it doesn't really on the card. There's not enough room for it. Ninjutsu means you may return an unblocked attacking creature you control back to your hand. If you pay the ninjutsu cost, you like trade places with the card you paid the ninjutsu cost for. So any creature in your hand while Satoru is out has ninjutsu for 4 mana. So for 4 mana, you can like play a creature out with some small requirements, some small hoops you have to jump through to get there. But yeah.
That's awesome. I think, like you were mentioning earlier, like demons, I think are just renowned for having super high mana cost, but they're just super big, impactful creatures that once they come on the battlefield, they demand a powerful presence. And I think this is a really perfect, unique way to skirt that high mana cost that you were mentioning earlier. So it's really cool to see this be a deck completely flavored on demons, and just glancing through it, I'm excited to talk about some of the card choices you made so far, and specifically some of the demons you've chosen for this. And I guess right off the bat, is there a blue demon?
So there's one that I have considered that I still have. Yeah, it's still in my considering section on Moxfield, and it's Silent Blade Oni. So it actually has a lot of flavor overlap with Satoru. And this is, so it's 3 blue, blue, black, black, so 7 mana total for a 6/5 demon ninja. And it has built-in ninjutsu for 6 mana, but that's not super relevant for this deck. And then it says, whenever Silent Blade Oni deals combat damage to a player, look at that player's hand. You may cast a non-land card in it without paying that card's mana cost. It's a demon and also a ninja, so it fits in really nicely, and it's blue and black. The only thing is, I'm not a big fan of that ability. I love cards that steal opponents' cards like off the top of their deck. But I just, something about when they've already like done the work to draw it and it's in their hand, I don't really like to steal cards from people's hands, especially like repeatedly. I think that can make people a little salty. So there is a demon that I think it actually does fit very well flavor-wise, but like mechanically, I'm not 100% sure if I want to play it, but it's still in my considering board in case I ever want to try it.
That is cool. I think that is, it's so interesting to see blue as a demon. I think that's,
as far as I know,
definitely flavorful, but
for sure. As far as I know, demons are probably like 98% in just black, and then a little blue and a little red. I think that is changing with the Warhammer 40k deck that has a ton of demons in it, but at least in like in-universe magic stuff, definitely mostly black for demons.
So while I guess we kind of jumped ahead of ourselves a little there, talking about like blue demons and I guess a sideboard consideration. I don't know, but so maybe the Oni was in this deck and his take coming out a little before. So I don't know. Let's talk about the deck's history. Has it gone through a lot of changes when you built this deck? Was it just like, oh, boom, these cards are what's in there, or was it kind of a process as you slowly refined over time?
Yeah. So the cool thing about this deck is it was just really easy for me to put together. So it hasn't gone through a ton of big changes, which I think a lot of my decks I reevaluate every once in a while, and I'll like make pretty like sweeping changes to them, just because it's Commander. There's a lot of variance, and it's hard to get your deck to do exactly what you're trying to get it to do, which is why this deck was so refreshing. It just like my first draft of it just like worked pretty well. And of course I needed some changes, but like right off the bat, it just kind of did exactly what I was hoping it would do. So yeah, for this deck, it just kind of felt good from the get-go. But to get into a little bit of some of the changes, I need to talk about kind of the way Satoru works. So in order to get the reduction in mana cost, so in order to like pay 4 mana to play a demon, you have to have an unblocked attacking creature, and that might actually be harder than you'd expect. If each other player has a couple creatures out, you can't really just expect to like swing your little creatures in and have them be unblocked. So A lot of this deck, a huge portion of this deck, is small creatures that are cheap, like mana wise, that are either unblockable or have some kind of evasive ability. And when I first built the deck, I had I had no idea how many of those to put in the deck. And then the other side of that is, so you want to have a few small creatures that are unblockable out. But you can't just be attacking with those. You also need to have big demons in your hand, or else you like don't have the payoff. So it's a true, like, you need part A and part B, and you need both of them at the same time in order to get to the profit, I guess. And
yes.
And yeah, I had no idea when I first built it, like, what those ratios would be. And so at first I actually had not enough. You might think I put too many demons in it, but I had not enough at first. I think I put like 10 or 12 in, and there were a lot of games where I would have a whole bunch of little unblockable creatures and then just no payoff for them.
Right.
And so yeah, kind of adjusting those two ratios has been the big part of this deck's history. Currently, I've landed on I have 18 demons in the deck, but 17 of them are cards that I would consider like I want to play for 4 mana. One of them is Varigoth, which is only 3 on its own, so that one doesn't really count. But yeah, so 17 big creatures to cheat in, and then I have 21 cards that either make or are like cheap, unblockable, or hard to block creatures. And so far recently, I'm always looking at those numbers to make sure they are functional. But lately, in the last like 5 or 6 games I played, they've been like spot on. So I'm pretty happy with where it's at. But yeah, I think that's the main thing that this deck has gone through, is I've adjusted those ratios quite a bit.
Yeah, I know that can be quite a difficult process. I used to have a Yuriko deck that was all about, ninjutsuing Yuriko in, and then you flip a big thing off the top. And I remember struggling to strike a similar balance where you don't want too many small unblockable creatures because you want to hit, heavy hitters off the top of your library. So, I think the best way to accommodate that is just like you said, you just need to play test it and just keep refining it and then finding what feels good. And it seems like you've hit just the perfect stride with this deck, just playing it and being, I needed more demons there, and I think I love decks that require you to play it to, master them. It's not just straightforward as you'd think. So I think that's a really good consideration for sure.
Totally. Yeah. And I think the cool thing about it is it is a pretty straightforward game plan. Like, you just play a small creature, attack with it, and then pay 4 mana to get a bigger creature. And so that kind of made it easy for me to change the deck over time. Like, I know a lot of times I'll be playing a deck, it just isn't quite working, but you might not be able to like figure out why, like what's wrong with it. It's hard to diagnose what's going on when it's not working. But for this deck, it was literally like, I'm missing, like, I'm playing the game and I've run out, like somebody board wiped and I don't have enough small unblockable creatures out. And so, the way to fix that is to add more small unblockable creatures and maybe a little card draw to get them. So yeah, it was kind of easy, like in game, to be like, this went wrong, but I already know how to fix it, which it did make things a lot easier for me. So yeah,
awesome.
Yeah, and then the one other thing I'll say as far as changes go, one thing. And this is for any other Satoru players out there, if you're listening to this, or if you want to build one. The EDH rec page, I actually haven't checked it in a while, but when I was looking at it back when I was first working on this deck, there are a ton of options for small unblockable creatures, and I think some of them that are played like on EDH rec maybe aren't the best options. And so I put kind of a couple like restrictions on myself to make sure I was getting the creatures I wanted. And one of the big reasons for that is every time you ninjutsu a demon out, you have to bounce that creature back to your hand, which means you need to recast it at some point. And I had a lot of creatures in here that like had unblockable or something similar that were 3 or more mana. And those were just really hard to like cast for 3 and then bounce back to my hand to get a demon for 4, and then the next turn I'd like cast it again for 3 not have enough mana to like do anything else, and it was kind of clunky. So a restriction I put on the deck is I didn't want any of my unblockable creatures to be more than 2 mana. So if you look at that section, they're all 2 or less, except for one I just couldn't resist. Kaito Shizuki is a planeswalker.
Oh, you have to.
And I give this one a pass just because it does other stuff as well. It has a card draw ability. But so it's 3 mana, and the -2 ability is create a 1/1 blue ninja token that says this creature can't be blocked. So technically it's a 3 mana like unblockable, but it also has some other stuff. It does a card draw, and then the ultimate is you get an emblem that says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, search your library for a blue or black creature card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. So if you ever get there, It's just like, I'm already attacking with unblockables anyway, so that's going to get a ton of demons. So that one gets a pass at 3 mana, but all of the other ones are 2 or less, and I would recommend that as well, especially the 1 mana ones. It's real easy to just keep playing your 1 mana like Tormented Soul over and over again for ninjutsu.
Yeah, I mean, especially like Ornithopter or something. Like, yeah, it's just it's easy. In the end, you don't want to, if you're paying 7 mana to ninjutsu, 4 mana to ninjutsu something out, and then 3 to recast something. You think about it, it's like you could have just paid 7 for the demon. Like, not really,
exactly.
But like the total investment, to get back to where you were.
Yeah, that's the thing. You don't want to be doing all this work and jumping through all these hoops. Like, it might feel cool, but then in the end, if you could have just hard cast it, then it defeats the purpose. So yeah, that's right. Something I learned. And I did have a bunch of 3 mana creatures for this purpose that I took out. And one thing I will say, since we're on the topic of the like evasive creatures, the ones that have haste are probably 10 times more valuable than the ones that don't. So like Ginger Brute has got to be one of the best ones. And
I would say one of my personal favorites you have here, Nether Trader. And I think the reason that one's so good is it can come back from the graveyard. You mentioned earlier, like if someone board wipes and wipes all of your small creatures before you can ninjutsu anything, this one has built-in recursion, which I think is really useful. Kind of trying to skirt the rampant removal that is often so prevalent in Commander.
It's true. Yeah. And yeah, Nether Trader is awesome. It's a 1/1 spirit with haste and shadow. And then, like a recursion ability. And then one of my favorites, which I kind of love because I liked playing this card a lot back in Khans of Tarkir Limited. It's Gurmag Swiftwing. It's just a 2 mana 1/2 bat with flying, first strike, and haste. And flying isn't always the most reliable evasive ability, but I find that there's usually one person without a flyer at least. So I'm fine with not having it be like totally unblockable because it has haste. And the reason for me liking haste so much is I find a lot of situations where if I have like a few demons in my hand, it really feels bad to like have to bounce your like one evasive creature back, and then next turn you play it, but it has summoning sickness, and then you have to wait a whole nother turn before you can play another demon. But with haste, you can just immediately like 2 mana cast it, 4 mana bounce it back, and that can be really nice sometimes. So
yeah, no, I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
And just looking at this whole suite, I think there's so much value, like just being able to recast a Fairy Seer after you bounce it, being able to scry to, like I think there's a lot of really fun tricks that can be done to make it worth your while. You have to repay the one, but being able to pay 1 to scry to every turn is that's pretty good value.
For sure. Yeah, and I think this is honestly a pretty flexible deck. Like if you took my deck list, you could make it your own and switch out the evasive creatures to be kind of like whatever you want them to be, because there are a ton of options out there, and it would be still super functional and work really well. So yeah, these are the ones I've kind of settled on right now, but this is always something that I'm looking at. Like if one evasive creature isn't quite working, there are lots of options to switch to.
Yeah, it's a good flex spot to have for sure.
Exactly, yeah.
So moving on to the next question, what would you say you like most about playing this deck?
We kind of talked about how straightforward this deck's game plan is. That appeals to me as what I call a end of the night type of deck, where usually I'll have had like a hard seltzer or two, over the course of a couple games playing. Like, I don't know what it is about my sagas deck, but just keeping track of 10 sagas at once is quite taxing on my brain, and I love it, but it takes a lot of brain power. So this is like my favorite deck. Satoru is my favorite deck to pull out, as I just play small creatures and then they make big demons, and that's kind of all it is. And big demons do cool things. So yes. I think that's honestly,
yes, they do.
That's honestly my favorite thing about this deck is I've been collecting lots of demon cards over the years and never really, like, I can put one or two in a deck here and there if it needs it. Like, I probably play Harvester of Souls in more decks than I should. It's a card draw demon. But this deck, it just feels cool to be able to put a whole bunch of demons in one deck and have it work really well. So that's honestly what I like the most, is it's an opportunity for me to play a bunch of my favorite creatures and still have it be pretty powerful. Like, this deck definitely packs a punch.
Yeah, I love the analogy of the end of the night deck. Like, it's a pretty straightforward, easy to pilot, but packs a punch. I think that it's always nice to, whenever you go to a game night with friends, to have, like the saga deck where you really rack your brain, and then the end of the night deck where it's just like, you know what, we're just gonna bring out some big stompy boys and do demonic things.
Definitely. Yeah, and some of the demons have really cool effects that I am obsessed with. Like, Lord of the Void is a card that I'm just, I'm always excited to play it. This is 4 black for a 7/7 flying demon. It says, whenever Lord of the Void deals combat damage to a player, exile the top 7 cards of that player's library, then put a creature card from among them onto the battlefield under your control. And so the cool thing about that, like, that's a pretty cool effect, but it's not great in Commander usually unless you have a way to give it haste, but just because people can see it coming. But the cool thing about ninjutsu is it's coming out of nowhere. They're not going to see it coming. So
out of the void, out of the darkness.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, in a way, ninjutsu kind of gives it haste because it comes into the battlefield attacking, and it's already unblocked. So Lord of the Void, as long as they don't kill it like at instant speed, it will deal the combat damage the turn it comes out, and then you'll get that effect like at least once, which I just think is really cool. I'm a fan of that.
Like you said, you don't want to steal cards from people's hands, but I'll take something off the top 7 of your library. Sure, 100%.
Right.
You haven't drawn those yet. Free game.
Yeah, and I find that people kind of love when that happens because they're like, yeah, check out the top 7 cards of my deck. Like, let's see what happens, and then you get something cool, and they're like, oh, yeah. There's something about that that's people, I think, respond well to, which I always think is a fun time.
Again, I think this is a perfect example of a card that really showcases a mini game within the game. It's
totally,
spin the wheel, let's look at the top 7.
Yeah, and it's fun to try to decide like which opponent you pick, and you're trying to like think of which players' decks have the coolest creatures to steal. That's one of the demons that I love the most in this deck, and they're just a bunch of cool demons with cool effects. A lot of them are kind of like attack or combat damage triggers, which work really well with this deck. So yeah, it all kind of comes together really nicely.
So moving on to the next question, what would you say are the overarching goals of this deck? I mean, aside from like winning, but like, what would you say is there an ulterior win condition, or what would you say is the overall goal?
Yes. So the main goal of this deck is to just simply get big demons out, and then either like use their effects to gain value, or just attack with them, because demons tend to fly most of the time, and a lot of them have trample and other abilities as well. So yeah, mainly I'll probably win by just attacking with big demons, which I'm always a fan of. And that's kind of the main goal of the deck, is to cheat out demons like earlier than people would like them to be out. So that's kind of the main goal of the deck. But a side goal, an alternate win condition I have in this deck, is Liliana's Contract. I think you probably know, Jarom, this is a card I've been kind of forcing in Commander for quite some time, in other decks too. But yeah, this one is 3 black for an enchantment, and it says, when Liliana's Contract enters the battlefield, you draw 4 cards and lose 4 life, And then at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 4 or more demons with different names, you win the game.
That card is amazing. Have you ever assembled the ultimate win with it where you had all 4 of the demons that Liliana was contracted to? And those were the 4 demons with different names. Silbrand, Kothafed, Bells and Lock, and there's one more.
Razaketh.
Razaketh, yeah.
Yep. So that's kind of the like the day that happens, I'm gonna like sign and date my Liliana's contract.
Yes. Oh my. Yes.
Because that's exactly it. That's the like top tier goal for this deck, is to have the most epic flavor win, Liliana's contract with Liliana's 4 demons. And some of you out there might be confused because unfortunately one of Liliana's demons is banned in Commander, and that is Grizzlebrand. Rightfully so. Grizzlebrand is 4 black, so 8 mana total for 7/7. Legendary demon with flying and lifelink that says pay 7 life, draw 7 cards. Pretty easy to see why that is not legal in Commander, because we have very high life totals. So just paying most of your life into that and drawing a whole bunch of cards is turns out that's a pretty good ability.
Yeah.
So the thing is, my in-person play group, and I also have a couple other friends who I play with online who are okay with this. They are okay with me playing Grizzlebrand in this deck. So I get the joy of like having the possibility of getting all 4 demons out.
Yes.
But, you know, it's with the caveat that Grizzlebrand is clearly extremely powerful. And I haven't been able to keep Grizzlebrand on board, which I'm totally fine with. Like, it's a banned card, so you should probably kill it if you can. But yeah, it's just a rule 0 conversation. If I were playing like on stream or something like that, or with people I haven't played with before, I would not play Grizzlebrand in the deck. I actually have a card that I switch it out for times like that. But with my friends who I've played with before and who I've gotten the okay from, I play Grizzlebrand in this deck, and let me tell you, it is a lot of fun.
Is your extra card option the Mask of Grizzlebrand in your
It is.
sideboard?
Yep. Yeah. So when somebody when I don't know the group but I still want to play this deck, I switch Grizzlebrand out for the Mask of Grizzlebrand, mostly for the flavor. I think that probably should just be a random demon or something, but it's hard to resist that flavor there. Yeah, and so I guess just to kind of specify the way, I think the easiest way to get the Liliana's contract with those 4 demons specifically is to somehow get Razaketh out as the first demon. Razaketh is the 8 mana 8/8 flying trampler that says pay 2 life, sack a creature, search your library for a card, and put it into your hand. So that way you can kind of sacrifice your small like evasive creatures and tutor out the other 3 Liliana's demons and then get those out. I think that's the easiest way to do it, but we'll see. It has not happened yet because, you know, Razaketh is kind of similar to Grizzlebrand. As soon as it hits the board, all 3 players immediately start working together. Yeah.
Well, the day you do, that will be a momentous day, and I love your plan to sign a date your Liliana's contract. That is just, yes, I cannot wait for the day. That sounds really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I will definitely let the world know when that event happens.
Switching gears to a more maybe a tough question to talk about, what would you say this deck's weaknesses are?
Yeah, something that I actually am okay with is this deck having a pretty big weakness, and that is that basically for all of this to work, everything that we've been talking about, I have to have Satoru on the battlefield. So more so than I think I would be comfortable with in most of my decks. This is a very like commander centric, depends on the commander being out type of deck. If Satoru has been killed a few times and is too expensive, it's very clunky because I'll have a handful of I don't even know, just 1 mana can't be blocked and 8 mana like Villas demons that I can't cast yet. So yeah, it can get kind of awkward sometimes, but I think that's honestly fine with me. Satoru feels very strong. It's 3 mana, so I can usually get it out on turn 2 or 3 and then immediately like 4 mana to start getting demons out. Since by then I'll probably have a couple evasive creatures, and it just feels really fast. So if my opponents are able to kill Satoru, I'm like totally fine with that. I think that having that weakness is actually important because it makes it not it makes the deck not as scary. And I honestly like, I like playing this deck at the power level it's currently at. And I will say I have I have a few cards in here that are meant for protection for Satoru specifically. And those are Swiftfoot Boots and Nurok Stealth Suit offer like some protection. But that's it. I think I do have a couple counter spells in here that I might use to protect Satoru. And so I do have cards in the deck that help kind of like cover that weakness. But I'm okay with like letting that weakness be kind of telegraphed because I don't want to just be flooding the board with demons and with no way to stop them all the time. Sometimes it's kind of fun, but most of the time I like to see some interaction. So yeah, that's what I would say is the biggest weakness is if Satoru gets killed, then everything kind of falls apart.
Yeah, and this is, I think, an important conversation actually that I think honestly I've found that newer Magic players benefit from it the most, and that's the conversation about how the best decks don't need to be winning all the time, if that makes sense. I think especially when I was new to Magic, I got really caught up in having the most optimized deck, have the best cards, so I could get out there and win as fast as possible. Which some people, that's their playstyle, and that's okay. But I think especially in a 4-player game, I think sometimes it's okay to lose. It's okay to not be in first place the whole time. And I think it's really a more fun and riveting game when the tides of the battle change. It sways back and forth. You're ahead with your demons, but your demons are removed and you lose your commander. How are you going to put it back together? I think it's part of the puzzle. It's part of the fun to really have that challenge. So I think sometimes when I have people ask me, oh, like, what is my deck missing? Like, it's not good enough. And I'm like, you know what? I think your deck's actually okay. I think it's okay not to have the golden bullet every game. I think that's a really good conversation to have with especially new commander players. So
yeah, I'm glad you dug into that a little bit more, Jarom. I agree. I think that it has taken me many years of playing commander to figure out the power level that I want my decks to be at and kind of like how fast I want them to be and how like vulnerable I want them to be. And it's hard to resist. Like when a deck is your favorite deck, you want to be taking out the cards that aren't as good and like upgrading them to cards that are slightly better. And like upgrading is always kind of the thing you're wanting to do. But the thing about this deck is like I could upgrade it by adding more protection, more intense counter spells, and things like that. But just from my experience of where I like my decks to be at, this is the amount of protection. Like there's some in there in case things work out perfectly and like I'm protected and everything's nice. I like having that option, but I don't want that to happen every game. Just like what you were saying, in a 4-player format, you should only be winning 25% of the time, which means it might feel bad, but it means you're losing the like pretty vast majority of the time, right? So yeah, I think it's good to be okay with that and to understand that even if you lost, it doesn't mean your deck is bad. Exactly. Your deck could function fantastically and you could still lose. So yeah, I'm glad you asked a little bit more into that because that is something that I like for this deck right now, but it's definitely hard to kind of get that sweet spot for other decks.
Yeah, and I think it's important to also follow up with that and say, if I have that conversation with someone, it's not because I think their deck is bad, and I'm just saying, oh, you just need to lighten up. That's not the conversation. I think it's more of just this is a game with multiple people, and not everyone wins. Not everyone can win, And, and so I think it's good to celebrate our opponents' victories and get them in the next game.
Exactly. Yeah, I like that attitude.
Okay, so this next question, let's talk about some notable cards that fill the generic roles. Card draw, mana ramp, interaction. What would you say are some of the big hitters in this list?
So I love this question. I think it's a very silly question, but I love seeing the answers that people give on this one. One of my favorite things in building a new deck is to not be using the most like standard forms of like card draw and removal and stuff like that. And I think that's one of the reasons why I like this deck so much is I've found a bunch of little like clever ways to get all of those things without using like read the bones for the 10th time. And so a couple I want to shout out for card draw specifically. Let's talk about Thalicos Seer. Have you ever heard of this card before?
I am actually familiar just because I use this in my Eurocode deck, but before that, I never.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Great
yeah.
card. Great. Let's yeah.
Yeah, I love that you have the background on Yuriko too, because it does have a lot of similar kind of pieces of the puzzle that go together. Thalicos here is blue for a 1/1 wizard with shadow. Shadow means it can block or be blocked only by creatures with shadow. So unless I'm playing against you, Jarom, it probably will be unblockable most of the time.
Yeah.
And but this one also says if Thalicos Seer leaves play, draw a card, which is really cool. So that works with ninjutsu beautifully because every time you attack with Thalicos Seer, it's unblocked because of shadow, and then you ninjutsu in a demon and return Thalicos Seer to your hand. And when that happens, Thalicos Seer draws you a card, but before you draw the card, Satoru's first ability triggers, and I will admit I've forgotten about Satoru's first ability many times. I'm trying my best to remember, but the first ability is some card selection-y card draw thing. Yeah, so you can look at cards, put one into your hand with Satoru, and then draw another card from Thalicos Seer leaving play. And you can basically do that like every turn as long as you have something to ninjutsu in. And it just becomes like a really nice little like card advantage engine. So yeah, that's a little one that I've really liked in this deck.
Definitely. I think that's a perfect example of why you would want Thalicos Seer as opposed to something else. Like, again, I didn't even think about its interaction with Satoru's first ability, which again isn't like I think why you would build around this deck. It's more the ninjutsu ability. But when you couple the fact that you get to look at the top three, one in your hand, one on the bottom, I think it's a really great way to you look at the top and you get to draw something. I think it's a really good way to, like you said, it's a good engine to churn through your deck and to get to those demons. And
right, exactly. Yeah, it helps a lot with the kind of like clunkiness of having a whole bunch of 1 mana creatures and a whole bunch of 7 mana creatures. You can filter through them a little bit. Yeah, and I just kind of like sources of card draw. Like even if Thalicos Seer only draws a couple cards, so it's like the same as a Sign in Blood or something, I still like it has the unblockable thing and it helps with ninjutsu, and it just works really well in this deck and makes it so that I can play things like that are kind of weird that I would not play in other decks instead of just playing a regular old Night's Whisper or something like that. And similarly, I really like Grazilax. Oh my god. Illithid Scholar. It's 1 blue for a 3/2 horror, and it says whenever a creature you control becomes blocked, you may return it to its owner's hand, and whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. This one's kind of a fun like mind game because if I attack someone with a flyer and they block it, I can just like return it to my hand. Or like if I attack someone with a flyer and they don't block it, then they're like, oh no, what demon am I going to get hit by? And I'm like, psych, I'm just going to draw a card off of this. Like they never know really what to expect. So yeah, I really like Grazilax for that as a little bit of spicy card draw.
Ooh, stop playing with your food, Alec. That's just mean. That's another prime example of the game within a game. Like, is he going to draw a card? Is it going to be Razaketh? Yeah. Is it going to be like what's it going to be? I think that's just hilarious, honestly.
Yeah, and I didn't actually talk about that too much, but people are terrified of the demons that are going to come out. People are so scared, and it's kind of funny because I always play into that and kind of like pretend like I have some good stuff, and sometimes I literally will have only lands in my hand, but I'm still gonna make them sweat a little bit. So yeah, that's always a little political thing, I guess, but I don't know if I really use it to my advantage. It just kind of adds tension to the game.
What I would also say, if I were to sit down with you, having not knowing anything about your deck, and you put out Satoru Umezawa, I would have zero clue that it would be a demon deck.
Yeah.
Unless someone's played with you before, like the cat's not out of the bag. That's that first ninjutsu ability. It's like, what's it going to be? And you're like demons. And you're like, oh geez, they're all going to be demons now, aren't they?
Yeah, and actually, so the thing about that is, I will usually, if I'm playing with like new people who I have not played with before, I will, during like the Rule Zero conversation, I will talk about how it's a demons deck. And the reason for that is I've noticed a lot of people who played against Satoru have gotten like hit by Blightsteel Colossus or Eldrazi Titans. Right. So when they see Satoru, they think they're going to be playing against Annihilator triggers and stuff. And so I want to make sure that they understand that I'm not doing anything like that. But, some of the demons like aren't super nice either. So I'll be like, it's demons, so the power level is stuck kind of at a certain point. But it's not like, it's not like attacking someone with Vilis or Demon of Loathing it's not bad, right? It's still like pretty good.
Right,
but
right.
They're not losing like that turn like they might with a Blightsteel or something.
No, I think that is definitely appropriate.
Yeah.
So I do have a question. It's the card Resculpt as an interaction piece. I want to get your thoughts on using that card as removal. And
so those are interesting. There are a few blue instants that exile creatures, and then Resculpt randomly just also hits artifacts and replaces it with a 4/4.
Oh my gosh, it hits art. I didn't realize it hit artifacts too. Wow.
Yeah.
And it exiles it. Okay, this card's getting better the more I think about it.
Yeah, so Resculpt, I would highly recommend. It's kind of weird because usually when I build a deck with black, the black cards are the removal spells. So something I've been noticing lately is I think blue has better removal spells than black does, or like targeted removal. Baleful Mastery is close. It's 1 in a black, and an opponent draws a card to exile a creature or planeswalker. But yeah, it's hard to resist just exiling an artifact or creature with Resculpt. So yeah, that's definitely in here. And one thing that I'm a fan of is instant speed removal spells.
Yeah.
That's why Raven Form is not in here. It also exiles an artifact or creature, I think, but it's a sorcery speed. So yeah, that one did not make the cut. But yeah, I'm a fan of Resculpt. Should it exist in its current form in the color blue? I'm not entirely convinced, but it exists. So I am playing it here.
I'm a true believer now. I think this. I saw it and I was like, yeah, they get a 4/4. It's I guess that's okay. But it can hit artifacts and it exiles it. I think the downside is definitely worth what you're getting out of it. So
that's fair. And I will note that a 4/4 is like it's a pretty big creature. But the reason I'm okay with it in this deck is all of my evasive creatures either have flying or they have some other evasive ability, and most demons have flying. So like the ground creatures, I'm very much like less worried about. So if it made like a flying bird or something like that, I probably would not play it just because of that. But since it's just a 4/4 on the ground, I'm fine doing that.
I think it's also I think using this card in the right light can also be, I'm going to exile this really scary thing on your side of the board, but you get a 4/4. Like it kind of,
that's
like,
true.
I'm going to slap your hand really hard, but then I'm going to put a little Band-Aid on it. It's just, you're like, so it feels bad, but not too bad, for them.
Totally.
So I think it's a good way to be like, you can't have that, but you can have this instead. So
yeah, I'm always a fan of cards like that. Like that's why I love Arcane Denial. I'm like, I'm countering your spell, teehee, but also you get to draw 2 cards in the next upkeep. So like, it's
Congrats.
all good, right? Yeah.
So the last one we haven't mentioned just yet is mana ramp. Is there any unique mana ramp or ways to get up on mana that you use in this deck, or was it just kind of basic artifact sweep for these colors, or what would you say?
Yeah, so blue and black definitely are going to be relying on artifacts for a lot of ramp, and here's one thing I will say is like a place to plant a flag this episode. I love mana ramp at 3 mana. Like, give me all those weird mana rocks that have fun abilities that are 3 mana. I love those. Yeah. Unfortunately, Satoru costs 3, so I'm not really able to play those in this deck just because like most of the time I want to be casting Satoru on turn 3 and not a mana rock. So all of my mana ramp is 2 or less, and 8 of them are artifacts, kind of the generic ones. But there are 2 I'll point out as kind of spicier ones. Ornithopter of Paradise is really fun. It's 2 mana for a 0/2 Thopter with flying, and you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color. That's really cool because if I need the mana, it gives that to me, but it also can be like an evasive creature that I can
totally
use for mana early and then like ninjutsu out later in the game. And then the other one is Silver Fur Master, which I honestly think might be not super worth it, but the flavor and like everything about it is just so cool and like fits with this deck really well that I can't take it out. It's blue and a black for a 2/2 rat ninja with ninjutsu for blue and a black itself. It also says ninjutsu abilities you activate cost 1 less to cast, and it says other ninja and rogue creatures you control get +1/+1. None of that is super relevant except for the ninjutsu cost reduction. So it makes which is, it can be significant, making the ninjutsu ability 3 mana instead of 4. Currently, I haven't had a game where I've ninjutsu'd 2 demons out in 1 turn for like 6 mana total, but that's kind of like the dream idea, is that you get 2 in 1 turn. If you're only doing 1 per turn, like it's kind of nice to save a mana, but you know, that kind of functions similar to like a Mind Stone or something, where it just adds a mana per turn. But the card is cool, so I will be playing it.
I feel like you've always had a special place in your heart for rats, and it's a rat ninja, so you just you gotta, it just has to be there, you know? I think it just fits.
It's true. Yeah, I'm a big fan of rats, and there's like this dream scenario where you ninjutsu out a bunch of stuff in 1 turn that I'm always holding on to.
So is there any other that you want to mention in the spot before we move on, or were those some of the key ones?
I think that's it. Yeah, the rest is like a lot of the removal is coming from the demons because a lot of them kill stuff. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
I'd say this is definitely my favorite question, and that is pet cards that you have thrown in here that you just can't resist playing, even if they maybe don't fit perfectly, or maybe they do. But what would you say your sweep of pet cards are in this deck?
Yeah, my perfect example of this is Sakashima's Will, which is a pet card of mine that I've been kind of playing probably when I shouldn't, but it's always cool. It's 3 and a blue for a sorcery, and it says choose 1. If you control a commander as you cast a spell, you may choose both. The first ability is target opponent chooses a creature they control, you gain control of it. So you can steal someone's thing that they, hopefully an opponent has like very few creatures, so you get a good one. But the second one is where it's fun. So it says choose a creature you control. Each other creature you control becomes a copy of that creature until end of turn. So the like dream scenario for this is I have like 5 or 6 little like baby creatures out, and late in the game they're like probably not doing too much, and so I can cast Sakashima's Will and make all of them copies of Lord of the Void or Abhorrent Overlord or something like that, and then just swing out with like a whole bunch of copies of a big demon.
Yes. This is a very unassuming card, and especially in the late game, like you said, it just really can turn an army of weenies into an army of insert largest, scariest creature on the board here. You know, like I
Exactly.
think the ceiling on this card is just, it's so high. You never know how far it's going to go. So I think it's a perfect home for this one, especially, you know, in the late game. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, this deck actually, it doesn't have a lot of room for like other miscellaneous effects, just because so many card slots are dedicated to either demons or like small evasive creatures. But I always fit that one in because I think the possibility of something really fun happening is too good to pass up. I guess kind of also in this category, I don't normally play just like straight up tutors for the most part, but I do have a really, really sweet copy of Demonic Tutor with the Japanese alternate art, full art.
No way.
I know.
Did you pull this?
Nope, I just bought it.
Oh my gosh. This is like the most flavorful card I think in this whole deck. It's just, it is so glorious to behold.
As soon as I saw this card previewed, it's from the Mystical Archives from the Strixhaven set. As soon as I saw this, I knew I had to have it because it's just so beautiful. And it has the coolest demon on it, and this is a demons deck, so I had to get it. I've actually cast this card to get a land probably half the time I've cast it, so I'm definitely not using it like optimally. But the flavor
that's my
is
favorite
good.
when you cast something like this. It's like, oh, he's gonna get the biggest, scariest demon. You're like,
Yeah,
Kapajuka Bog. Oh no,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, right.
So yeah, I like to use it for silly purposes, but it's mainly in there just because I love this card so much, and this is a demons deck, so it kind of fits right in.
That is a prime example of a pet card. I love it.
It does feel kind of weird saying Demonic Tutor is the pet card in this deck, but I guess it is.
Well, and this is maybe like knowing you, like you said, you've never really been one to big on like tutors and stuff, and knowing this deck, like having talked about it, it's not like you're tutoring up a combo finish to win on the spot. Like
Right.
say you're
Yeah.
getting a land or you're getting just a big demon, you need to you know get out like on the next turn or something. So I don't think it's like I think it fits just very comfortably here. And again, the
For
flavor
sure.
is just incredible.
Yes. Thank you very much for helping me justify its inclusion in the deck.
Oh, yes. Okay, one question for a card that I was just as I was looking, I want to know if it's a pet card. But I can
Yeah.
see its place being good here, but I want to get your thoughts on Amphin Mutineer.
Oh, okay. You know what? Yeah, that is a pet card of mine. So this is a 3/3 Salamander Pirate for 3 and a blue. When it enters the battlefield, you exile up to one target non-salamander creature. That creature's controller creates a 4/3 blue Salamander Warrior creature token. Then it has Encore for 6. Honestly, so I have an axolotl. His name is Squishy, and
Oh.
axolotls are a variety of salamander. And I have a bunch of 4/3 blue Salamander Warrior creature tokens that are like drawings of Squishy. And
Oh, stop.
so
Oh.
I play Amphin Mutineer as much as possible, just as like a removal spell in the deck, so that I can use my Squishy tokens. And I mean, it works. It exiles a creature, so it's not bad.
Plus, if the scenario arose, you could ninjutsu him back, and then it's an ETB, so there's
Yeah,
potential to get that trigger more than once. Obviously, with Encore, that might be easier. But I think with the commander out, you could if there's an opponent with no creatures, boom, ninjutsu him back, and then Squishy will
totally.
strike again.
Yes, yeah. It might be
So
a little bit of a stretch, just because 4 mana for a removal spell is like it's pretty high compared to like Resculpt or
yeah,
something. But
right.
for me, it's worth it. I'm glad you caught that. That is definitely a pet card that I don't think other
Okay.
people would necessarily run.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect fit in here. It's funny. It's a little bit of a meme, but it's also got some.
Yeah,
Plus, you have the tokens. You have the tokens of Squishy.
exactly. Yeah.
We can't just leave those at home when we bring this deck.
No, no,
Give
no.
them.
Yeah, they're coming with.
Okay, so moving on to the next question. Why don't you tell us what you think the MVP or the most synergistic card in this deck would be?
It's a little bit of a hard one just because a lot of the cards in this deck are pretty interchangeable. You need like one
Mhm.
evasive creature, and it can pretty much be any of them, and then like one big demon, and you can also pretty much be any of them. Honestly, so I would say that Ornithopter is the MVP.
Really? Yeah.
And yeah, it's kind of funny, but the reason for that is it's the only 0-drop creature that this deck can play like for this purpose. And it has flying, so it's hard to block. And you can bounce it back to your hand and then just like recast it that same turn for free, even if you're tapped out, like doing ninjutsu. And then next turn it'll be able to attack again. So yeah, it's kind of like a 1 mana creature with haste, if that makes sense. Like if you have an Ornithopter, then the engine is going to be running real smoothly for the rest of the game.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense, especially with an Ornithopter like that. Even like when you attack, like it's just so unassuming. It's just a little
Right.
Ornithopter. Boom, psych! It's a Runescar Demon. I'm gonna tutor something. Like
Exactly. Yeah, it's
I
kind of
think
funny
it's
too. The kind of the way this deck works is I'm attacking you with my 0/2, so I'm attacking you for 0. And but then I'm like, are you gonna block it? Like you have to declare blockers, and then I'm gonna like pause right
yeah.
there. So and they're like, no, I'm not blocking it. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna pause, and now we're gonna ninjutsu. Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of a funny process that is pretty unique to
Yeah.
decks like this.
Plus, you have to love a deck where the MVP is Ornithopter. I'm just
Yeah,
saying. I mean, and I understand your hesitation. You said, yeah, to that question where, like, I think I would struggle where I think about some of my decks where it's the strategy is heavily reliant on the commander, because you don't want to say the commander is the MVP, the numerous demons you want to cheat out. But I can see how this is just maybe stands up just a little bit above the rest because of its versatility
for
and
sure.
its
Yeah, the commander kind of enables all of it, but it definitely requires some key pieces to actually get anywhere with it.
Okay, so this next question, I know it's not the Liliana's contract with the four demons yet. I One day that will be the answer to this question, but for now, what would you say has been your favorite in-game moment you've had while playing this deck?
It's been a long time, so I can't remember exactly what occurred that like got this situation set up. But basically, during a game, I was able to attack one of my opponents with a small creature, and it was like pretty early. And then I ninjutsu'd out Obnixilis Unshackled. This one is whenever an opponent searches their library, that player sacrifices a creature and loses 10 life. And it kind of like was pretty detrimental because a bunch of my opponents, one in particular, was really like looking to tutor for a win condition of some kind. So the cool thing that happened was the player who was trying to tutor had 11 life, was trying to tutor for something, and so was finally able to kill Obnixilis and then like tutored. And then in response, one of the other players at instant speed was able to recur Obnixilis back onto the battlefield. So then that player ended up taking 10 damage down to 1, but was able to complete the tutor and then ended up barely being able to put together a victory that turn. But I just thought it was so funny, the way Obnixilis kind of like warped the game, and so early on too, because I was able to cheat it out for 4 mana. That's just kind of stuck with me. It's not really something like super intense that this deck has done, but it just kind of like allowed for this scenario that I think was hilarious. And kind of the way that
awesome.
yeah, and then the way that like another player was able to use Obnixilis out of my graveyard was hilarious. Just like all around, it was a really funny moment. And yeah, and that's kind of like the first one that came to mind when I was thinking about cool moments that happened while I was playing this deck.
You gotta love the Power Rangers Unite moment where the table, like does the 1-2 punch against the arch nemesis at the table, where
Exactly. Yeah.
you had it out and then it was removed, but someone's like, haha, like I will bring it back. A surprise alliance against the large foe at the table. I think that's awesome. That's a perfect example of, again, like you said, this is a huge card that has a big impact on a game that generally isn't expected so early on. So I think
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really fun.
One of I think the most important questions to conclude with, for anyone out there who would want to build this deck, what advice would you give to those players looking to maybe do a Satoru Umezawa deck or maybe a Demons deck? What advice would you give to them?
Yeah, so I've kind of been dropping like little pieces of wisdom all throughout the episode, which I hope has helped somewhat. But yeah, so I think it's probably a pretty specific type of person that wants to build a Satoru deck that also is a Demons deck. But I think the important thing to keep in mind is that the kind of like template for this deck works for so many different purposes. Like all you really need is small evasive creatures and then big things to cheat out. So those things can be anything. Like you can do Eldrazi, anything in blue and black at least. You can do sea creatures. I think that one's a pretty cool way to go. Yeah, or just some kind of like mix of all your favorite blue and black large creatures. And I think you can really like customize it and make it your own, which I would definitely encourage. Just make sure you have like a high number of those big creatures and also the small ones to attack with. And then just kind of like be responsible with your land and ramp. This is definitely a pretty mana hungry deck, wanting to ninjutsu lots of mana each turn. And then kind of like the backup plan for me is to just hard cast the demons. So I'm running 38 lands and then 10 ways to accelerate on mana. So it's pretty high, but I would encourage you to also play a high number of lands and ramp. But honestly, besides that, yeah, hopefully this episode has helped with kind of like the general idea, but I think this is a really easy deck to customize, and I love my demons version. If you want to make a demons version too, I say do it. It's a ton of fun.
Yeah, I think if anyone out there has a guess in blue or black colors that you want to use and abuse, I think Satoru is a great shell to skirt the expensive cost of those creatures and really pack a surprise and bring a lot of mystery to the table. I think it's a really fun way to not only build a deck but to pilot one. I think it's a really great way to. Like I said, it adds intrigue and tension to and
it's true.
One of my favorite parts about playing with 4 people at a table.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. Oh, and one last thing before I forget. If you build a Satoru deck, don't forget to put in your Faerie Conclave as one of your lands.
Yes.
Because, and I hadn't really mentioned this yet, but Faerie Conclave, for 1 and a blue, turns into a 2/1 flying fairy creature. So you can bounce that back to your hand and replace it with a demon if you want to.
The Faerie Conclave coming in unclutched. That'll be when you sign your Faerie Conclave, it's when you bounce it back to put out a demon that wins you a game. That'll be the.
I actually have done that before. I don't know if I won the game
Yes.
exactly that at that moment, but yeah, I have used Faerie Conclave. It's probably the only time I've used it beyond just being like, hey, look, it's my Faerie Conclave token, and then it dies immediately or something. But yeah, I like the extra little bit of actual utility that it has in this deck.
Oh, that's awesome. On the backs of the fairies rode the demons into battle.
That would be a great title for this episode. Thank you, Jarom.
There you go. Well, Alec, I really hope you enjoyed going through one of your own personal decks. You definitely put in so much work into the Faerie Conclave, and I think it's just appropriate that we give you time to show off one of your favorite decks, and you really put so much care and thought into your decks. It really is just such a pleasure to get some insight and see what you've created. So thank you for sharing that with me. It's been awesome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate that. I also appreciate you coming on to ask me questions about it. I would not have been able to do this all by myself. So yeah, thank you again, Jarom, for coming on and recording an episode.
Absolutely. Anytime. I am here to do anything I can to support the glorious Faerie Conclave. So thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
You're the best. Do you want to close things out just like the good old days?
Oh, just like the good old... Wow, I never thought you'd ask. Of course. Well, thank you. I would love to. So thank you, all of our wonderful listeners on the Faerie Conclave, all of you people who keep returning, and all of the new people that have come to enjoy the wonderful Magic content that Alec is now putting out. And so feel free to check out the show notes. I'm sure Alec will include his deck list for this, and we'll also include the Epic Storm as well for you to go support that channel. Feel free to go on to Twitter, follow Alec and the Faerie Conclave on Twitter and Instagram, and our Discord. We have a pretty active community where we're always talking about Magic, playing games, and it's a really great community to join. As always, thank you everyone for joining us. Welcome to the Clave, all you new members, and we'll catch you all next time.